are you on schedule with everything, and do you anticipate that you'll be ready for the first preseason game?
We're totally on schedule, on budget. It's been a really smooth process. I thank Turner, I thank people in our department like Brian and everyone, but we're in good shape. And I've been a part of a few of these, and you can tell when they're going well.
What is the schedule?
The schedule is to be ready by our first home preseason game.
Alec, how many years would you say you've, with this project, both phases, when they're done, how many years have you added to the life of this stadium as far as keeping it within the upper tier of NFL standards?
That's a good question. You know, Daryl, the stadium hadn't really been touched for about 15 years. And so we're really just trying to get it back up to par in the NFL. We don't spend much time figuring out how many years we're adding. We just want to make sure it's a really good experience for our fans, and we think next year it will be.
For the video boards, he mentioned a shipment was coming in. When do you expect those to be operational?
Well, they once they come in, they should be operational soon after that. I don't know the exact dates, but towards the end of this month they'll come in, and then they'll be up and running very shortly after that. These guys went out to, South Dakota, and visited the boards. They're already functional. I mean, they build them and they're functional, then you just kind of put it together.
So I guess that leads me to, what is the last thing that needs to be done to wrap up this phase of construction? Is it the seating? It sounds like the video boards are going to be done before that.
It's all of it coming together. The escalators have to be put up. Okay. The seats are in pretty good shape. You guys can see it. It doesn't take long. Once you've built the platforms for the seats, adding the seats back in doesn't take long. I look at it as a whole process. I mean, we've got to clean up all the stuff that's around here, but I have no doubt we'll get it done. And Daktronics has done a great job on the video boards as well.
Would you revisit, please, the accurate cost of Phase 1 and the cost of Phase 2?
We haven't broken out the cost of Phase 1 and Phase 2. It'll be a $120 million project. That's what we've talked about from the beginning. Very confident it'll be at $120 million. And then we break it down into Phase 1, which is kind of for all of our fans, and you see the differences. And then Phase 2 will upgrade a lot of the interior areas.
What kind of an impact do you think this will have on a fan coming to the game? How will their game day experience be different now, just in general?
It's a good question, Mary Kay. I have the luxury of going to every NFL stadium around the league. And the one thing you notice, when the video boards and the audio systems work really well together, the impact is huge. And when you're in a stadium where it's outdated, you almost feel like you're missing something. And so I think ultimately we're going to look back and say, boy, that was a huge upgrade for the fan experience. And I think it'll be massive. I think people feel a totally different way about coming to Browns games.
When you put together this project, obviously you looked, as you mentioned, you've toured other stadiums, you looked at what's out there, what they've done. Have you been the recipient of calls from other teams around the league to take a peek at what the Browns are doing with this facility?
Yeah, and we share best practices across the league. So a lot of teams will reach out to us when they're thinking about a similar renovation. I was telling Mary Kay earlier, some stadiums go $20 or $30 million renovations. Some do $400 or $500 million. We're about right in between. But I think we're touching everything that matters for our fans here. And I suspect a lot of people will come in and check out what we did. I think our video boards, too, having a unique size, as John mentioned earlier, we're just not fitting video boards into where they were. We rebuilt the entire platform, and we're going to have video boards that look like nothing else in the NFL.
What stadiums is this comparable to in terms of using the other stadiums as a reference point for some of the things you're doing here?
Well, each one is so different. They really are. So we take bits and pieces from it. I was lucky enough when I was in Dallas, we also toured every single stadium to figure out what elements we wanted to incorporate. So I don't know, there were a few stadiums that were built around this time. Cincinnati was, I think Pittsburgh was, I think there are others. You look at those and you see what they've done. But you also look at the newest ones and you see if you can borrow some good concepts.
Now, like the scoreboards in Baltimore have always been, when they were built, were top notch. I mean, how would you compare what we're going to see here compared to the one in Baltimore? One's in Baltimore.
We did last year when I was in Baltimore. We spent a lot of time touring that stadium. I also think that's a good analogy for us. And I think we're going to be right in that stage. I mean, I think especially after Phase 2. So Phase 2 will brighten up our concourses, add new lighting, interior. We'll just update the space. So Phase 1 is like a huge infrastructure change, and phase 2, it'll feel and look a lot different. I think at the end of next year, you'll say, boy, this looks really good compared to stadiums like Baltimore, Pittsburgh, Cincinnati.
There's a technology reality also. In a year or two, you won't be able to get spare parts for this technology that was in the scoreboards we took down. Try and get parts for your VCR.
What will be the life of the new boards, do you think?
That technology is anticipated to be at least 10 years, at least.
Will Jimmy Haslam or you guys have any involvement in any of the area or development around the stadium?
We haven't talked about that yet. That's not an area that we own or really even is under lease, but we'd be happy to talk to anyone.
Hey,
Prior to the sale of the team, that was something that was being explored, the Browns having some sort of involvement. I know you weren't here for that, and obviously you weren't involved with Randy Lerner or Mike Holmgren to that extent. But is that something, though, that the organization, even though it's not your land, wouldn't you want some input on that, though, and maybe trying to help spearhead that effort?
I think our first priority was to the fans that come to the games. And we thought this was a pretty ambitious project. And once we start making progress on this, any other way to impact our fans positively, we'll look at. And that can be parking around the stadium, that can be how people get to the stadium, we'll look at all of it.
Alec, when you guys are bracing to have larger crowds at training camp than ever before and needing online registration, logic would tell you that the same might apply for the stadium, yet you're losing seats. Can you just address that? Are you concerned about a subtraction of seats?
Well, we had about 72,000 seats last year, and we'll be at about 68,000 this year. And typically in a stadium, those last 4,000 seats are the toughest to sell anyway. People always talk about that. We'll have a lot of demand for our seats, but we did last year too. And I think it was every single game but one, it was filled to capacity, and every single game was a sellout. And so for us, it's much more about the experience. We took what we thought were probably the least valuable seats to our fans, turned those into a much better video experience and a lot more lower level seats.
Has everything been settled with the season ticket holders who were displaced?
Yeah, Kevin, it's a good question. We've worked through it with our season ticket holders. What we do is we try to have one-on-one calls with anyone who has an issue. We have a great ticket sales staff, a guy named John Davis, who we hired from the Reds a couple of years ago. He's fantastic. And we deal with these one-on-one. If you have an issue, you call us up and we work through it. And there were a bunch of people relocated, but we're proud of kind of where they're going and how we've handled the process.
Alec, if the target date for completion is the first preseason game, that tells us that family night won't be at the stadium. Is that something that is firmed up?
We're still working through family night. Here's what I will say about family night. We are committed to having an open scrimmage for our team. And so that means either we'll figure out a way to have it here or we'll figure out another location to have it. And once we know the details, we'll share it with all of you.
How about the revenue opportunities that might be presented with all the new stuff you're doing on this side and everything else? How big of an opportunity is there?
I look at it more like we have a bunch of partners and fans who want to be part of this, and we have to make sure that we're totally modern. It's hard to, before you talk about revenue, it's much more, okay, do we have things that people care about that they want to be part of? And I think we've now addressed that, Kevin, I really do. When you think about like a deck that's dedicated to Bud Light or a deck that's dedicated to Ford, that's important to our partners and to our fans, and then the revenue I think will follow.
Couple more questions, guys. We all set?
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for coming out.